All right, our next speaker before the break is Toweill from Chevron. It's going to talk about Chevron's hydrogen aspirations and activities. So, welcome, Al.
All right, thank you. Good to be here at UT. Hopefully I'll get a chance to tour the facility, the hydrogen prototype hub tomorrow that we help support. We're also a supporter of Syzygy, so plug for that. Maybe we'll come back to that. But I'm here to talk about how Chevron thinks about hydrogen and a couple of our activities in the hydrogen space. Before that, just a brief intro on myself. I'm a chemical engineer, bachelor's, been with Chevron about 25 years, started in refining, and I like to tell people if you point at the skyline of the Richmond refinery in California, there's about a 50% chance that you're pointing at something, some piece of equipment that I've been in, changed catalyst, designed a heat exchanger, done all of the traditional chemical engineering stuff. That is my background. Then I worked in the supply chain, I worked in LCFS compliance, and more recently have made a foray into a technology manager role. Hydrogen delivery manager is my title, and what that means in a practical sense is I manage a small portfolio of internal research and development. We're focused on thermal catalysis, which Trevor touched on, but it is an area of Chevron's traditional strength. We basically invented hydroprocessing, which is thermal catalysis, maybe 60 years ago, and we've been leaning on that, and there's a lot of areas in hydrogen that make sense for thermal catalysis where it can have a role. I don't think I need to describe what Chevron is, what we do. We're an oil company, we're an integrated oil company. I'll just add to this. We're about 85% upstream, which is the production of oil and gas, and about 15% downstream, which is the refining and processing and production of product and chemicals, making lubricants, additives, et cetera. We as well are feeling a little bit of pressure. The OPEC consortium is increasing production, and with the price of $60, that puts a lot of pressure on things that we do as well. So there's a trough, but it's not a trough of disillusionment, it's just a trough. A couple of our core beliefs lead into our strategy, and I'll just touch on the collaboration one here. Collaboration is critical to the future of energy. That's absolutely true. We believe that no single entity can act alone, be it a government, be it a company, or anything else, in order to achieve what's going to be needed for the energy transition. There will be an energy transition, and everybody's going to have to cooperate. So our strategy is to leverage our strengths to safely deliver lower carbon energy to a growing world. And what does that mean? Well, it means that the future is lower carbon. The future of energy is lower carbon. We believe that. There will be an energy transition. We have a net zero aspiration for scope 1 and 2 emissions associated with our upstream production, which makes sense. Again, we're 85% an upstream production company. We don't know exactly how we'll get there, but we do have that aspiration for 2050. And how we're organized as a result of that, we have a traditional oil products and gas business, which is combined upstream and downstream, and it integrates things like renewable fuels, biodiesel, renewable diesel, blending ethanol, more recently SAF, but those are combined into our traditional business line because we've been doing those for 20 years or more. And we can make our own renewable diesel in our refineries. We also have a dedicated facility in Geismar, Louisiana, where we make renewable diesel. We can actually make some sustainable aviation fuel and sustainable gasoline at our El Segundo refinery. We have that capability. And those things are well integrated into our business, blending products that our customers want in policy-enabled markets. Parallel to that, we have what's called our Chevron New Energies business line. And within Chevron New Energies, that's where hydrogen is housed. We also have CCUS, carbon offsets, and renewable natural gas. Those are sort of the 4 big pillars that are housed within Chevron New Energies. Those units are equal in the sense that they both report to the CEO. Of course, Chevron New Energies is a little bit more nascent, but they're viewed very equally in the company, and obviously we hope there's a lot of growth in the new energies area coming in the future. So now we dive a little bit deeper into hydrogen specifically. We believe that the role of hydrogen can be very large as a decarbonization vector, especially where electrification of demand is not feasible. This particular stat on the left, I believe, is from, an International Energy Agency projection, which we're aligned with. We actually co-chaired a report that we delivered from the National Petroleum Council last year to the Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm. And that study, I believe, had a 5-fold growth. This particular stat shows a 3-fold growth from today in lower carbon hydrogen. And that's on top of, and in addition to the fossil-based hydrogen, which is on the left. Today we own and operate about 1 million tons per year of unabated hydrogen, primarily in our refineries, used in processes like hydroprocessing. But any net zero, I'll say credible net zero forecast in 2050 or beyond includes hydrogen as a decarbonization vector. And so we believe in the growth pattern. We're very aligned actually with how Trevor described the hype cycle. We think that we are sort of in that trough, but there are things that are really happening. And the only thing maybe I'll add on top of that is that there's a lot of energy security factors, especially in Europe with the war in Ukraine, that are kind of overlying things right now as well. So it's not all about hype versus not hype from a technology standpoint. There are some global energy vectors in play as well. But we believe in the underlying growth. China is probably leading the way. China is leading the way in actual deployments, but the underlying growth vector is up in Europe, the US, and China. And so we believe that hydrogen can be a very important part of that zero carbon future. Where can hydrogen be used? Well, we believe much like something like renewable natural gas or just natural gas, there will be energy vectors around the world, from energy producing power hubs like the Gulf Coast of the US, here in Texas, or perhaps Australia is another good example, to energy consumers like Europe and Asia. And so ultimately, what do you want? You want hydrogen to be traded as a commodity like an energy vector that it can be. That's a future that we believe in. But if you look specifically, where does Chevron see a role? It's where can hydrogen have some sort of an advantage or play a complementary role to some other energy chain that's already there? And we've got some good examples here. One is in the transportation sector. The example I like to use there is a Class 8 vehicle. If you're trying to decarbonize a Class 8 vehicle and you look at on a same range basis, your two choices are really battery electric or using a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. And if you convert, there's an 80,000 pound on-road weight limit, Department of Transportation standards. And if you convert that truck to a battery at the same range, it's about an 8,000 pound debit on your ability to carry freight. The same number, if you convert to something using hydrogen, is about 2,000 pounds for the same range. So there's an intrinsic energy density by weight advantage that hydrogen has in the transportation sector for heavy duty. So that's one of our anchor points. We do have some activities there. I'll mention that we brought 2 hydrogen stations online this past year, one in Vacaville, California, Northern California, one in Moreno Valley, Southern California, and there's another one that we're trying to bring online in Carson in Southern California by the end of this year. Those are light duty stations. Some of them are heavy duty enabled. Heavy duty is really where we think it makes the most sense. But of course, we'd love to sell people light duty hydrogen to the extent that there is demand. So we're not going to turn people away. So transportation in policy enabled markets we think is an important vector. The next vector that I think about is power generation. And power generation is interesting. As it becomes more renewable over time, of course, there's going to be a lot of intermittency, whether it's from wind or solar. The power supply goes up and down. And so to complement that and truly decarbonize the power grid, you're going to need some sort of energy storage. And that's where we think hydrogen can play a role to complement intermittency on the grid. There's also another thing that's really been happening which is power is generally produced using combined cycle gas turbines with natural gas or burning coal. And if you substitute hydrogen for natural gas or substitute hydrogen or a derivative for coal, then you can partially decarbonize. Incrementalism counts. And you can utilize the same capital asset base that you've already got in the ground. So even if fuel cells were cheaper than they are, and they're not, but even if they were the same cost as a cogen, you wouldn't instantly at industrial scale say, I'm going to throw away my $2 billion, $3 billion investment generating power from this cogen. I would start by blending hydrogen, even though it might be less efficient than using a fuel cell. And so we see a lot of activity in the market there, especially in Asia. And the third example here is hard-to-abate industrials. And that really refers to where hydrogen is used as a chemical. So I talked about the example in refineries where hydrogen is used in hydroprocessing to remove impurities from jet, gas, and diesel fuel before they are sold on the market. Another great example is ammonia, where hydrogen is used to create ammonia, and that is used again in the fertilizer industry. Also, where hydrogen can provide high temperature heat for some processes, that can be an advantage in processes that may not be able to be electrified or electrified reliably. A lot of these technologies are still under development, but burning hydrogen for a thermal source of high heat can make sense as well. We're seeing a lot of activity in that area. So now I'll shift to what are we actually doing? Well, these first three projects that I'll talk about, and then I'll talk about a few more, are 2 electrolysis projects and then a carbon capture enabled ammonia project in the Gulf. ACES Delta is in Utah, and it's a alkaline electrolysis project. It's a joint venture with Mitsubishi and Chevron. It's 220 megawatts of electrolysis. It's 40 electrolyzers, 5.5 megawatt each. It's coming online now with, knock on wood, it'll be online by the end of this year. Maybe not fully, but be online producing. And it's a seasonal energy storage play. And so what we're doing is we're buying lower carbon power from Intermountain Utility. I believe it's mostly wind. It's probably some solar as well. We're using that electricity, of course, in electrolysis to convert water to hydrogen. And then we're going to seasonally store it in 2 salt caverns. The salt caverns are each as big as the Empire State Building if the Empire State Building if the top of it were 3,000 feet below the surface. And so you store when power is cheap and you sell it back when power is expensive. Generally, that follows a pattern of winter to summer, but wind has a different pattern than sun, and so there's some seasonality that you wouldn't necessarily expect in that equation. And we're excited about that project. And I can answer probably a few more questions on that. Once the hydrogen is brought back, it's going to be burned up to a 30% blend with 70% being natural gas back to the same utility who are running power turbines to make electricity for local sale and for export to California. This is a smaller project. It's a PEM project with one of our partners, Cummins. It's up to 5 megawatts. It's in the Central Valley of California. We have the solar array already there installed, but it's in permitting phases. So there is some uncertainty associated with that. But it would be targeting the heavy-duty vehicle market in California, hopefully. This project here, this is our Gulf Coast project. It's comprised of 2 different parts, 2 sort of sister projects. We're actually a founding member of the High Velocity Hub, one of the DOE hubs that hasn't formally lost funding. I believe the rule is you have to have a shovel in the ground by 2027, maybe the end of 2027. And it's a carbon capture enabled ammonia project. So blue hydrogen project with ammonia, if you want to use the color. And the sister project that we have is called Bayou Bend. It's some acreage that we have in the Gulf Coast with pore space for CO2 storage. And we're hopeful that that project will go forward at industrial scale. But yes, I agree there is some uncertainty there. Here's another project that wasn't on that first introductory slide. This is a demonstration that we did. It was with a subsidiary of Caterpillar called Solar Turbines, and we blended up to a 60% hydrogen blend with 40% natural gas, creating power, clean power for, in this case, crude oil production in our San Joaquin business unit in California. I believe we ran that for over a year. I believe the demonstration is done right now. It's a liquid hydrogen supply chain, which is kind of interesting. We learned quite a bit by doing a liquid hydrogen supply chain for this particular project, I would say. And we also have a lot of other types of partnerships and ways that we work with people. Several companies that we've invested in through our Chevron Technology Ventures Future Energy Fund, VC arm of Chevron, which is a lot closer to where I work actually, and don't need to introduce syzygy. You just got a great crash course in syzygy the last 30 minutes. So I'll point out a couple of other things that we've invested in. One is Aurora Hydrogen. It's a methane pyrolysis company out of Canada. Methane pyrolysis, if you don't know, it's taking natural gas, CH4, and converting it to hydrogen, H2, and carbon, C, in a solid form. And that's a unique way of making lower carbon hydrogen. You're not making CO2 in the first place, so you don't have to capture it. So that could be advantaged in areas where there aren't a lot of pore space in the world, perhaps Asia. Hydrogenious is an interesting one. It's a liquid organic hydrogen carrier company out of Germany. And LOHC, if you're not familiar, you take hydrogen and saturate a liquid like you would diesel. You ship it like diesel, and then at the port of sale, you have to release the hydrogen chemically. And then you turn the ship around with the liquid on it to pick up another load. And so that's pretty unique in that it can take advantage of existing oil and gas infrastructure, tankage, pipelines, et cetera. So that's obviously an attractive one for Chevron. I won't say that we're judging anything necessarily. I think in the transport sector, ammonia is sort of the default winner because it's been de-risked. And at a similar cost point at industrial scale, it's to what LOHC is projecting at least the capability for. And I'll mention Raven. Raven is another company we've invested in. In that case, we actually have a project right now next to the Richmond refinery. It's a rotary kiln reformer, they call it. It's sort of like gasification, and it's turning mixed solid waste into hydrogen for local sale or for use at the refinery. It is also in permitting stages. The landfill is right across the fence from the refinery, literally, so one could see the advantages there. And they have a plan that involves scaling as well. So, of course, we invest in these things because of the tech, and we wish all of them the best, and we hope to be a good partner to them as they scale. But based on the hype cycle and other factors, we'll see if that turns out to be reality in many cases. Closing thoughts and maybe some bonus thoughts. Hydrogen is a high-growth global energy market that plays to our strengths. We're pursuing project opportunities with demand and supply optionality across supply pathways. Partnership is required, and it will take time to materialize. Maybe before we take questions, I'll throw out another couple random things that weren't in this particular presentation. I often get questions around geologic hydrogen, and I know that a panel is coming up next, so maybe I'll comment on that. I think from our perspective, based on the reactivity and the diffusivity of hydrogen subsurface, it's unlikely that we'll discover something at scale that is required for the low cost that people can project. But we're glad to be wrong. We hope to be proven wrong. We recognize the transformational nature of a supply like that and the role that a company like Chevron could play. So we know that there's a lot of startup activities and drilling. Most startup companies have given percent concentration results, but no flow testing results. And so we're sort of waiting to see the flow tests, the proof in the pudding. As the technology guy, I like the concept of induced because you've got what they call a kitchen that you could inject water, maybe with a catalyst, in order to take iron from one oxidation state to another and create hydrogen from the water. And that sounds an awful lot like something that Chevron would be good at and are good at. And so I think that personally is a great vector. And I look forward to hearing more about that from the panel. There was nuclear came up yesterday, and I liked the concept of using heat to depletion. And so I'm probably going to steal that and use that. The heat is free if you build a nuclear reactor first. And if you do some kind of thermal conversion of water to hydrogen, then that makes an awful lot of sense. In fact, Chevron's invested in a nuclear fission and a nuclear fusion company, both from a startup company perspective, and that's a space that we're watching closely. So with that, hopefully I've told you a little bit about how we think. There's more resources online, and glad to take your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Al. All right, so if you have questions, write them on the note cards, and they'll get them up here. My one question, all your refueling stations, I mentioned this in my opening remarks, they're all in California. What's wrong with Texas?
There's nothing wrong with Texas. I live in Texas. I'm happy to be in Texas. I'd say the policy enablement is really the missing equation. That's pretty much the long and the short of it. California has the LCFS compliance program, and that enables a higher level of policy enablement, frankly.
But I guess the question, I mean, it's still that hasn't lowered the cost of hydrogen in California to be any sort of reasonable amount from what I've heard from people. Yep. And doesn't the industry and the backbone of Texas, regardless of the policy, make Texas a place where there should at least be a few fueling stations?
Yeah, I think from a production standpoint, that's absolutely correct, and you probably will see production starting to ramp up in Texas. Let's say that one of the DOE hydrogen hub projects goes forward. Well, the anchor tenant might be Asia to receive ammonia, for instance, but in the process of doing so, you've got that anchor tenant established, somebody that's willing to pay that premium, and that could enable all kinds of other things because you're doing that thing in the first place. So I think that you will see some hydrogen stations kind of in the shadow of larger other projects. That's my guess.
I hope so. Here we go. All right, so here's another question. What laws and regulations will help hydrogen the most? You sort of touched on the California one, which I think is very interesting. In Texas, I think Texas put in like $14 million towards some transportation, anyway, some grant stuff. But what laws and regulations will help hydrogen the most?
Well, I'll answer the question that I want to. I think if you ask Chevron, what does well-designed policy look like if we were emperor of the globe for a day, it would be sort of like a standardized price on carbon that is equal across the globe. It comes up slowly, equitably, people can afford it, and it's going to drive the most economic answer over time. That's not the reality of where we live. There's a patchwork of regulation, and so we optimize in all of the countries we do business in within the regulation. But the one thing that doesn't really exist is certainty, even for those regulations that have a high level of policy support. And so if things are subject to pen stroke risk, we'll look at what's called an S-curve on an investment decision, and if there's even a 3% chance that you're going to lose your entire investment, that weighs pretty heavily in the minds of executives as they're making these decisions. And so constancy of purpose, technology agnostic, and slow and equitable over time is probably the best answer that I can give you.
Awesome. Are there any other questions? I think there's one being written right here. Are you writing one? Okay. Does Chevron have any plan to replace HPV, HPU, What does HPU stand for? Hydrogen production unit. Does Chevron have any plan to replace hydrogen production unit located on next to your own refinery to blue and green? So I guess shifting from blue to green?
Shifting from blue to green, I would say, is probably not a near-term focus based on that capital investment level. You could envision small green taking shape parallel next to big blue, if that's how you want to think about it. But a complete displacement is probably not part of our strategy when we've invested $500 million to $1 billion in each refinery's worth of hydrogen production already. That would be perhaps a bridge too far, but not impossible. Gray to blue, now you're talking, right? That takes advantage of existing infrastructure. So, and it takes advantage of CCS, which we've been able to do for a long time. Yeah.
Well, go back to the policy question. So the fact that 45Q survived, does that help, give more impetus for converting gray to blue for y'all, or?
Absolutely, yeah. If that had not happened, then I wouldn't be showing that on my slide, frankly.
All right, awesome. Any last questions? All right, if you have more questions, you can find Al at the breaks. We'll have a break, reconvene at 11 o'clock, and thanks again, Al, for the talk.
Thank you.